That looks really hectic. I'm actually really looking forward to watching it.
It does. How did I get I wanted a part on that. Like, that's crazy.
No, and
I think
so
was.
it's $100,000 for the people who have to catch the fugitive, right?
Yeah,
Right. Yeah. Well, that's a pretty big payday if you can do it.
it is. I can't wait to see it. I love all this stuff, especially like it's our industry and it's on mainstream television. So,
Mm.
but getting ahead of ourselves here, I am joined today by the Queen of True Crime, Emily Webb. So she's an Australian journalist, a Melbourne-based journalist, author, podcaster, and she is the co-host of the Australian True Crime podcast with Michelle Laurie. And you also host a podcast and produce the podcast yourself called Killer Content. And you've just brought out is this number 2 book?
It's actually number 4, technically.
Number
Yeah.
4. Oh
Yeah.
gosh, okay. Wow, I'm out of the loop here. That's so exciting. So, Emily, before we jump into your new book, which looks amazing and I can't wait to read it, I'm going to order it on Booktopia as soon as we're done here. But can you let us know how you even got into the world of true crime in the first place?
Yeah, sure. And thank you for your very sweet introduction as Queen of True Crime. There's a few people who I think might be above me, but it's very nice of you to say that. So I've been interested in true crime for a long time. I've always been a big reader, and I was really interested in nonfiction. So I started reading true crime from a fairly youngish age. I was just really interested in learning about, why people do the things they do, and police investigations, and it really just built from there. And I became a journalist, and when I was working on a local newspaper, I worked at some suburban newspapers. I used to love going to the courts and reporting on crime and delving into cold cases, unsolved crimes, sort of in the area where I live. So I've just always been intrigued by it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And so you host the podcast. How many years have you been doing the podcast for?
So Michelle Laurie and I have been doing it for, I think we're in our 5th year, and it was actually Michelle read one of my books. So I have a couple of books that went out of print before the podcast started, and then she'd read one of my books and said, come and do an interview for something else she was doing. And then she said, hey, do you want to do a podcast together? And I really liked podcasts. They were still in their infancy at that stage. I was like, yeah. And it's just gone from there. It's an amazing, amazing experience and privilege to do what we do and speak to so many different people. So it's great. And our listeners are amazing.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And that's what I wanted to ask you about is, how do you find the interview process with people that have been through these things or bear witness to these terrible crimes?
Yeah, so it's on a case-by-case basis, but what we find is, you need to deal with it sensitively, but everyone's different. Some people really, they contact us, they want to talk about their lived experience. Other experiences we've had, it's quite raw, and you just need to make sure that you're aware of everything you're going to ask and talk to them about what they're comfortable talking about, the message they want to convey, because really we're about creating a space for them to tell their story. It's not about us. It's about giving people a platform to, talk about things that have happened to them. And some of our guests have said they've found it really cathartic almost to be able to do that. And it's often many, many years later from when they were impacted by a crime, or they're a family member who has had a loved one murdered or is missing. It's many years before they're able to speak about that. So it's an incredible honour to be able to speak to them.
Yeah, oh, that's fantastic. It's similar to like when a factual investigator, not that we do crimes, we do mainly civil matters. Sometimes it crosses over, but when we're interviewing people that something terrible has happened to, like a car accident or something along those lines, just having that sensitivity and getting the information out of them is just it's an art form, really. Like you're a balancing act between wanting to draw the information out and keep them on topic and make sure that you're sensitive to their needs as well. So I
Yeah.
just, yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, it's true. It's very true. You've got to yeah, you need to be good with people, I think, especially in your line of work. It's not just about getting the facts, it's about connecting with people, and that's what storytelling's all about. And you do that in your work. You're telling a story. You're telling a story to,
Exactly.
in terms of what's happened and what information you need to find out.
Yeah. And have you had any true crime cases that you've covered that you've just really had to actively work to not let your emotions run away with you or affect
Mm.
you in a deep way? And how do you deal with that?
Yeah, so I find that I I can separate myself from it a bit, but it's easy for me to do. I'm in the position where I'm not directly impacted, but what I've really found very interesting is that there's a big ripple effect to crime. So, it's how it affects, it just flows out to all areas. It can be the people directly impacted, it can be communities, groups. And I guess in a way, like when you're interested in this space, you do need to take some care of yourself. But I've always been more interested in it's the people, it's the impacts on them rather than some people like maybe the real detail of the crime. I'm more
Yeah.
interested in how does it affect them, how do they get
Mhm.
help, like what are the consequences of this, like trauma is a big thing that people can experience. So look, there are some cases that really do affect you in terms of you can't believe it's happened, and it's very sad and you feel very sad for the people, especially when they don't have a resolution to something, like when someone goes missing, and sometimes these people are missing, presumed murdered, and their families just don't have any answers, and I find that really heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Sometimes people will say they've had a loved one have something tragic happen to them who's been murdered, but through the court process or having somewhere to go and honor them, visit them, helps a bit. But for people whose loved one is missing, they don't have that, and I think that's really, really sad.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we'll jump into talking about your book now. So it's called Suburban True Crime, Australian Cases You'll Never Forget and Some You've Never Heard of. And what was the inspiration behind this book? Was there a specific case where you're like, I need to get that out there? Or
Hmm. Yeah, so this book started off. It's a collection of cases. Some of them have been published previously in my first two books, but what I've done is I've updated them. I've updated them with some interviews with people, information I didn't have at the time. Things have changed. But how it started was I was reporting for leader newspapers and following some cases, and in particular ones that were really local to me. Some unsolved murders, including one of a woman who was murdered in her home, a woman called Nanette Ellis, and she was stabbed to death in her home as she was getting ready to go out. She'd just come back from work, and it was like a period of 45 minutes, and it's not been solved. And I've had the privilege of meeting her family, working with them to do some articles and then a chapter for this book, and they're still waiting for answers more than 30 years on. In fact, it'll be approaching 40 years in 2024. So that's a long time. And
it
other
is.
cases I've followed are ones that have faded out of public awareness. And,
Mhm.
when you read them and research them, it's like shocking at the time, they had a big impact. Or sometimes there's cases that don't really get a lot of coverage, but when you delve into it and talk to people, you realize that, the impact is just as great as some of the cases that have maybe bigger media attention. So that's what
Yeah.
drives me. I do like to sort of delve into the records and have a look and talk to retired police officers, people who've been impacted by crime, all sorts of people to tell a story.
Yeah, fantastic. And so is the book out yet or
Yeah, it's out now. It's in bookstores and online, and an audiobook's coming as well, and it's published by Big Sky Publishing, and they've been incredibly supportive. And I'm just really glad to get it out there because, a lot of
yeah.
people were like, I want to read your books, I can't find them. And that's because the podcast has, got a lot of listeners. So I was just really thrilled to be able to also update it. I mean, you progress as a writer. So when you start,
Yeah.
You do your thing and then you get better. And I think
Yeah.
it's a really good collection of stories that cover a wide range of crimes. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm just really grateful to have had people help me to do it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So I'll just show it again so people can see it. So Suburban True Crime, Australian cases you'll never forget and some you've never heard of. So I love it. And I am definitely picking up a copy. And where can people find you if they would like to follow your work or listen to your podcast?
Sure. So you can find Australian True Crime podcast and Killer Content podcast that I do. That's with talking to authors, mainly crime fiction, about how
Mm-hmm.
they tell their stories. You can find it on your preferred podcast provider, so Apple, Spotify, those kind of ones. And I'm also on the socials, so you can find me on Instagram, Emily Webb Crime, Twitter. Look me up. I've got a Facebook page and I have a website called Emily Webb Crime. So yeah, please send me a message. Let me know if you've read the book, and also if there's any cases that you think should be covered or talked about for the podcast or for writing. I'd love to hear from people.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I'm sure that there are people out there that'll take you up on that. Okay, well, Emily, thank you so much for joining us. I'm very, very grateful, and it's been a pleasure to meet you. And hopefully, I will be able to get you back on and we can have a more in-depth chat. But I'll show your book once more time because it's fantastic. And I know, well, I don't know personally, but authors tell me that it's like having a baby and it's finally out there, and it's very, very exciting for you. So
Yeah.
excellent. Well,
Thank
thank you
you.
very much.
Thanks for the support too. Thank you very much.
You're more than welcome.